The shelter was filled with chaos. In the dim light of the late afternoon, the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights above reflected the wear and tear of a place struggling to keep up. The barking of dogs echoed through the hallways, drowning out the noise of busy workers. Dust floated lazily in the air, giving everything a gritty, almost forgotten feel. Workers hurried past, trying to calm down the animals, cleaning cages, or just trying to keep things moving. A boy, barely 12, stood there, looking out of place in his oversized jacket. His eyes scanned the room, not with fear, but with a quiet determination. He'd come for one reason, and it wasn't to adopt just any dog. He moved forward, his sneakers tapping softly against the cracked linoleum. His gaze focused on one of the dogs near the far corner. It wasn't just any dog. The animal, scruffy, unkempt and ragged, had a look in its eyes that matched the boy's, a look that screamed of being lost, unnoticed, yet hopeful. A bond formed instantly, invisible but tangible. The boy stood there just inches away from the dog, his heart racing as he slowly extended his hand. The dog, eyes wide and wary, remained still, but there was something about the boy's presence that made it hesitate. For a brief moment, the sounds of barking dogs, the workers cleaning cages, and the hum of overhead lights seemed to disappear. The boy whispered softly, "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was tender, filled with a promise that this moment wasn't about rushing, about forcing anything. He could see the fear in the dog's eyes, the deep scar of abandonment it carried. Yet, there was something else there, something fragile but hopeful. The dog's breathing slowed, its muscles tensed but not in fear. It was deciding whether or not it could trust this strange boy. The bond formed silently, almost imperceptibly. The dog's body language slowly began to shift, from tense to tentative. It leaned forward just a little. The boy, noticing the change, held his breath for a moment. He knew better than to make any sudden movements. He stayed still, his gaze soft, never breaking the connection. The dog's eyes never left him, not for a second. It seemed to weigh the boy's presence carefully, like a fragile trust was forming between them, piece by piece. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dog moved closer to the bars of the kennel. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The boy smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of victory, but of recognition. He had made it past the first barrier, the one built by fear and abandonment. The boy gently spoke again, "I'll be back tomorrow, I promise." He wasn't sure why, but he felt like that promise meant something. The boy stood, his eyes never leaving the dog. His heart was pounding now, but there was a warmth that hadn't been there before. There was something special about this moment, about the quiet connection they were forging. He looked up at the shelter worker, who had been watching them from a distance. Her expression softened as she saw the boy's gaze fixed on the dog. The bond that could form between a person and an animal when the timing was right was something she understood well. But she didn't want to get too hopeful. She had seen so many dogs come and go, so many failed adoptions. Still, she couldn't help but think maybe this time would be different. As the boy turned to leave, he glanced back at the dog. There was something unspoken in the look they shared, a silent promise that tomorrow the connection would only grow stronger. The boy's promise echoed in his mind as he left the shelter that evening. He knew he couldn't come every day, but something told him he had to keep his word. There was something about the dog that drew him in, something unspoken, something deep. The next day he returned, and then again, the day after that. Each time he stood in front of the kennel, his gaze fixed on the dog. Each day, the dog moved a little closer, its body language less wary, more open. By the fourth day, the dog was sitting at the front of the kennel, its eyes no longer filled with suspicion but curiosity. And for the first time since he arrived, the dog didn't pull away as the boy reached out. The worker watched from the side, noticing the change. There was something real happening here, something that had been missing in the shelter for far too long. The dog's past wasn't something that could be easily ignored. It had been once loved, once part of a family, a loyal companion who had experienced joy before the darkness. The shelter worker, had seen it all before. She had heard their stories, each one worse than the last, and each one harder to bear. She knew that this particular dog had been raised in comfort, given everything it had ever needed. At least, that's how the story went before it all unraveled. The dog's past was a story of broken promises and dreams left behind. It sat there for days, for weeks, waiting, wondering if maybe this time would be different. The worker remembered the look in its eyes the first time she saw it, a blend of confusion and fear, but underneath there was something stronger, something that wouldn't give up. The dog was waiting for a savior, and the worker knew the boy might just be that. The dog's history, though unclear, had a noticeable imprint on its behavior. It wasn't just a stray. It had once been loved. The dog had been trained, kept in a home, shown affection, and then abandoned. The dog had been a prize once, shown off at dog shows, paraded around as an ideal companion. It had been taught to perform tricks, to please its owners, to be perfect. Then, one day, it was simply tossed aside, as if nothing had ever mattered. The shelter worker remembered hearing the story from one of the volunteers. The dog had been found on the side of the road, looking lost, its coat ragged and dirty, and its eyes wide with disbelief. It had waited at the shelter every day, but no one came back for it. No one even called. It was as if the dog had never existed, only to be left to wander in a place it had once called home. Days went by, and the dog's behavior seemed to shift. But then, slowly, something changed. The boy didn't notice at first. He came in every day, sitting quietly in front of the kennel, offering only soft words and a hand stretched out. At first, the dog resisted, but gradually it began to inch closer. Its steps were hesitant, unsure, but there was no retreating anymore. The boy's presence had become something the dog couldn't ignore. It was as if the dog had finally realized that not all humans would hurt it. The worker, who had been watching from a distance, could see the shift. She had seen this before, when the spark of hope finally lit up in an animal's heart, no matter how small. It was fragile, but it was there. And for the first time, the dog wasn't waiting for someone to leave it again. It was waiting for someone to stay. The dog had finally closed the gap. It was no longer just a passive observer, distant and unreachable. Now, it sat at the front of the kennel, head tilted slightly, watching the boy. The dog's wariness was still there, but it was different now. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The boy continued to visit, always gentle, never pushing. He'd sit for hours, reading a book or simply talking softly, never demanding anything from the dog. And bit by bit, the dog started responding. One day, as the boy gently placed his hand through the bars, the dog leaned forward. It sniffed his fingers, hesitantly at first, then with growing curiosity. It was a breakthrough, a moment where the past wasn't forgotten, but it was finally being allowed to fade into the background. She had never seen the dog respond like this to anyone. Something was finally shifting. And the boy, he was a part of that. The connection between the boy and the dog had deepened over the course of several visits. It was no longer just a visit to a shelter. It had become a quiet ritual. The dog had learned to trust, and the boy had learned patience. Every day, the boy's presence seemed to calm the dog, and every day, the dog became more responsive. The shelter worker observed from afar, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and sadness. She had seen so many dogs pass through the shelter, each one with a story, each one with a wound too deep to heal. The boy's visits had sparked something within the animal. It wasn't just about food or shelter anymore. The dog was learning what it meant to be loved again. The worker knew that there was still much work to be done, but for the first time the dog's future felt like something worth fighting. The days were blending into one another, and with each visit, the boy's connection with the dog grew stronger. The dog's wariness had nearly vanished. There was trust now, a quiet understanding. The boy wasn't just another person passing through. The dog knew that now. The boy had come to mean something, a source of comfort, of consistency, in a life that had known nothing but loss. The boy still sat in front of the kennel, offering his presence like a lifeline. He didn't rush the dog, didn't force anything. The boy's patience was unlike anything the dog had known before. He watched the dog, seeing the subtle shifts in its body language, the way it was beginning to breathe a little easier. The shelter worker, observing them both, could see the transformation. The dog was no longer just a shell of its former self. It was waking up, slowly, and the boy was at the heart of it all. The shelter worker's emotions were a mix of guarded optimism and old scars. She could see the difference. She could see it in the way the dog responded to the boy's calm presence. The transformation was subtle, but it was undeniable. The dog was no longer just another case to be managed. It was starting to trust again, to hope again. She had to admit, part of her had thought this dog was beyond saving. But now she wasn't so sure. Maybe this wasn't just a story of another abandonment, but one of redemption. The boy, with his quiet persistence, had become the catalyst. There was still a long road ahead, but in that moment she believed in the possibility of something better for the dog. As the boy returned every day, the dog began to exhibit subtle signs of affection. It started leaning closer to the front of its kennel when the boy arrived, wagging its tail gently. The transformation was happening, and it was more than just trust. The dog was beginning to seek companionship, not just from the boy, but from humans again. The dog was not just waiting anymore. It was reaching out. Each day, the dog became a little more present. It no longer recoiled at the sound of the boy's voice or the rustle of his movements. Instead, it leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. The boy smiled when the dog leaned closer, as though understanding the significance of the moment. The worker watched, silently moved by the dog's progress, knowing that the boy had done more than just offer comfort. One afternoon the boy sat in his usual spot, and something extraordinary happened. The dog, now more comfortable with him, gently approached the kennel bars and pressed its nose against the boy's hand. It was a full, deliberate gesture, a clear sign that the dog had chosen to trust. The boy's breath caught in his throat as he extended his hand further, his fingers grazing the dog's snout. He didn't want to rush it. He could feel the weight of the moment. It was the beginning of something deeper. The worker, standing at the door, noticed the change immediately. It was the first time the dog had initiated contact, and the sense of relief was palpable. The shelter that had once felt so heavy with despair suddenly felt filled with the possibility of new beginnings. The boy looked up at the worker, a smile spreading across his face. She smiled back. The dog had come a long way since the boy first set foot in the shelter. It was no longer the fearful, distant creature that had once hidden in the corner. The dog now sat at the front of its kennel, eagerly awaiting the boy's arrival each day. And with each passing day, the dog's trust deepened. It had learned not just to rely on the boy, but to seek him out. The boy, for his part, had never once rushed or pushed the dog. He allowed it to go at its own pace, knowing that healing wasn't a race. One afternoon, as the boy sat cross-legged on the floor, the dog walked slowly to the front of its kennel and, for the first time, placed its paw gently on the boy's outstretched hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to both of them. The shelter worker, watching from a distance, wiped a tear from her eye. The boy's visits had become a routine. Every day, like clockwork, he came to the shelter, his face lighting up as he approached the dog's kennel. The dog, too, had come to expect these visits. It now rushed to the front of its kennel when it saw the boy. There was no hesitation anymore, no more cautious steps. The dog was no longer just waiting. It was actively seeking the boy's attention, eager to greet him with a wagging tail and soft eyes. The bond between them had grown stronger each day. The boy was no longer just the visitor, he was the anchor. The shelter worker had started to notice how the dog's demeanor had changed. It had become more confident, its body language more open. There was less fear in its eyes, less sadness in its posture. The transformation wasn't just emotional, it was physical. The dog stood straighter, its movements more fluid. It was as if it had found a reason to live again. The shelter worker had seen a lot of animals come through, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched the boy and the dog interact. The dog's transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. When it first arrived, it was a shell of its former self, confused and fearful. Now it was a different animal altogether. The boy had worked tirelessly to help it heal, to show it that not all humans were capable of cruelty. The worker had been wary at first, unsure of how the boy's visits would affect the dog. But with each passing day, she saw the dog's demeanor change. The dog began to trust, began to rely on the boy's steady presence. It was a quiet miracle, but a miracle nonetheless. The shelter worker knew that this wasn't just about the dog finding its way back to trust. It was also about the boy finding something in himself, something he hadn't realized he'd been searching for. One day, the boy arrived at the shelter, his heart racing with excitement. The shelter worker had told him that it was time for the dog to be taken out of its kennel for the first time in months. This was the moment. The boy felt a mix of emotions as he entered the shelter, the anticipation building inside him. He had seen the dog make incredible progress, but this was different. This was the next step in the dog's journey, the moment when it would leave the confines of its cage and walk freely. As the boy approached the dog's kennel, the dog's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, everything around them seemed to fade away. The shelter worker opened the gate, and the boy reached down, gently clipping the leash to the dog's collar. The dog hesitated for a moment, its body tensing, but then it took a cautious step forward. The boy smiled, his heart swelling with pride. This was the beginning of something new. With the leash clipped securely, the boy slowly led the dog out of the kennel. The dog hesitated at first, its paws unsure on the cold concrete floor of the shelter. But as the boy walked beside it, speaking softly to reassure it, the dog followed. Step by step, the dog grew more confident. It no longer looked back at the kennel, no longer thought of the cage it had been confined to for so long. It was walking on its own in the world for the first time in months. The boy kept a steady pace, never pulling the dog along but letting it take its time. The shelter worker followed behind, watching the two of them with a mixture of awe and sadness. She knew this was a turning point for the dog, but she also knew that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. The dog had a long way to go, but it was free now. Free to explore, to heal, and to trust once more. As they walked together, the boy and the dog reached the shelter's small yard. The dog stopped for a moment, its eyes wide as it looked around. It had been so long since it had seen the outside world, and everything was new again. The boy knelt down beside the dog, his hand resting gently on its back. He spoke softly to it, calming it with his voice. The dog stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, its tail wagging ever so slightly. The shelter worker stood in the doorway, watching them from a distance. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, knowing that the dog had made it this far. The boy had been its savior, but in many ways, the dog had saved him as well. The bond between them was undeniable, a quiet understanding shared between two souls who had been broken and had found healing together. The boy had come a long way. It had been weeks since he first walked into the shelter, his heart uncertain but filled with hope. The dog had changed in ways no one could have predicted. It was no longer the fearful creature huddled in the back of the kennel, but a confident, eager companion. They had learned from each other, grown together in a way that felt almost sacred. The dog's trust, once fragile and hesitant, had solidified into a bond of quiet understanding. But there was something more. The boy had found a sense of purpose in the dog's recovery. Where once he had felt lost in his own world, now he felt needed. He had given the dog a second chance, but the dog had also given him something back. Something he hadn't realized he was missing. It was no longer just about the dog's future. It was about their shared journey. As the days passed, the boy continued to visit the shelter, but now it was no longer a routine. The bond between them had turned into something more. The dog, once confined to the walls of its kennel, now accompanied the boy on walks outside. They explored the shelter's yard, and each day the dog grew stronger, its steps more confident. But it wasn't just physical growth, it was emotional growth too. The dog had begun to trust not only the boy, but also the world around it. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the dog wasn't just surviving, it was living. The boy smiled as he watched the dog take its first real steps into the world beyond the shelter. There were still scars to heal, both in the dog's heart and his own, but for the first time, they both felt a sense of peace. As the boy and the dog spent more time together, the dog's behavior continued to evolve. It started to play, a joyful energy that had been buried for so long coming to the surface. The boy would toss a ball, and the dog would chase it eagerly, its energy infectious. The shelter worker watched from the side, amazed at how much the dog had transformed in such a short amount of time. It was as if the dog was reclaiming its lost joy. There was a time when it had been afraid to move, afraid to trust, but now it was running, jumping, and playing like any other dog. The boy laughed as the dog brought the ball back to him, its eyes sparkling with excitement. For the first time in a long while, both the dog and the boy were laughing, two beings who had been through the worst, but had found the courage to heal together. But the road to healing wasn't always smooth. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the dog would hesitate. The boy noticed the shifts, the moments when the dog would pull back, uncertain and afraid. It was in those moments that the boy would sit down beside the dog, his hand resting gently on its back, offering comfort and reassurance. The dog, though still carrying the scars of its past, had learned to trust, and in those moments of doubt, the boy reminded it that it wasn't alone. Healing, after all, wasn't a straight line. There would be setbacks, moments of fear, but the important thing was that the dog had found a safe place to land, in the boy's presence, and the boy knew that with each setback, they were moving forward. The dog was learning to face its fears, and the boy was learning to face his own. Together, they were becoming stronger, one day at a time. The boy's last visit to the shelter felt different. It was time. The dog had healed, in more ways than one. The boy had given it the love and patience it needed to trust again. But the time had come for the dog to move on, to find a permanent home. The adoption papers had been signed, and the boy's heart swelled with pride and sadness at the same time. The dog had come so far, and now it would have a home, a family that would love it forever. As the boy and the dog shared one last walk through the yard, the dog's tail wagged with excitement, and its steps were confident, no longer held back by fear. The boy crouched down beside the dog, offering one last moment of reassurance. The dog looked up at him with eyes full of trust, its heart healed. And for the boy, this moment, this bond, would remain forever in his heart. The shelter worker stood in the distance watching them, a bittersweet smile on her face, knowing that their journey had come to an end. The day had come for the dog to leave the shelter for good. The boy stood beside the dog, his hand resting gently on its back. The adoption papers were signed. The dog was officially his. But as they prepared to leave, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. It felt like a new chapter, one that would come with its own challenges. The shelter worker, who had witnessed their bond from the beginning, approached the boy. She looked at the dog with a sense of pride, knowing how far the animal had come. She knew that the journey wasn't over. The dog had been through so much, and there would be days ahead when both the boy and the dog would have to face new hurdles. The dog was walking out of the shelter, free from its past. The boy had given it the chance to heal, and now it was time for them to build a future together. The car ride was quiet. The boy kept glancing at the dog in the rearview mirror, his heart racing with excitement and nervousness. He didn't know what to expect once they got home. The dog had come so far, but the outside world was still a place of uncertainty for it. The boy spoke softly, as though trying to reassure the dog. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. The dog lay down on the back seat, eyes calm but alert, its head resting on the armrest. The bond they had shared at the shelter had only grown stronger, but this was a new chapter, one that neither of them had navigated before. The boy thought of the days spent with the dog at the shelter, the moments of connection, and how far they had come. As the car drove into the neighborhood, the boy felt a surge of hope. The dog would find peace, and so would he. When they arrived at the house, The boy opened the door and stepped out first. He looked back at the dog, his heart beating faster. The dog hesitated, stepping cautiously out of the car. The boy smiled softly, his voice gentle. "It's okay, come on." The dog stepped onto the front yard, its paws tentative, but curious. The boy watched closely, noticing how the dog's posture had shifted from uncertainty to cautious exploration. It sniffed the grass, its tail twitching as if unsure what to do next. The boy knelt down to the dog's level, softly reassuring it. "This is home now," he said, almost to himself as much as to the dog. The dog looked up at him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met in quiet understanding. The journey wasn't over, but this was the beginning of something new. The dog had found its place, and so had the boy. The boy and the dog spent the afternoon exploring their new home together. At first, the dog was hesitant, sniffing the corners of the house, unsure of where it belonged. The boy followed closely, letting the dog set the pace. As they moved through each room, the boy spoke softly, describing the house and its new surroundings. "This is your room," he said as they walked into a small cozy space with a soft bed in the corner. The dog stepped into the room, its ears perked, sniffing around, and then it lay down on the bed, its body relaxing for the first time in a long while. The boy sat on the floor next to the bed, watching the dog with a quiet sense of peace. The dog had found a place where it could finally rest, a place where it was loved and safe. And the boy? He had found a new purpose, a new companion who would fill his life with joy and healing. The night fell, and the house was quiet, save for the soft sound of the dog's breathing as it lay on its new bed. The boy sat on the couch, his gaze fixed on the dog, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey they had taken together had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. The dog had come so far, from a fearful, abandoned animal to a loyal companion, ready to trust again. He realized now that the dog had given him as much as he had given it. It wasn't just about saving the dog, it was about the journey they had shared, the bond they had built. The boy stood up and walked to the dog's side, kneeling down to stroke its fur. The dog stirred slightly, looking up at him with a look of quiet affection. They shared a moment of peace, and in that moment, the boy knew everything would be okay. They had both found their place, together. The days had passed slowly, since the boy and the dog had settled into their new life. Every morning began with the dog's eager wag of its tail, as it greeted the boy, excited for the day ahead. The boy had learned that, in many ways, the dog had saved him as much as he had saved it. There were still challenges, moments when the dog's past would resurface, when uncertainty would make the dog hesitate. But in those moments, the boy simply sat beside it, offering quiet comfort. Together they were learning to trust again. The dog learning to trust the world, and the boy learning to trust himself. The boy often found himself thinking about the shelter, the long journey that had brought them here. In those quiet, peaceful moments, it felt as if everything had fallen into place. The dog had found a home, and so had he. They had both been waiting for this. One afternoon, the boy took the dog to the local park for a walk. The dog had grown stronger, more confident, its movements fluid and sure. It trotted beside the boy, its tail wagging gently. The park was quiet, with only a few people scattered around enjoying the sunny day. As they walked, the boy thought about how much had changed since that first day at the shelter. The dog, once uncertain and fearful, had become a vibrant companion. It ran ahead for a moment, stopping to sniff the grass, its curiosity unabashed. He realized how much he had grown too. The boy and the dog had navigated their healing together, finding strength in each other. The boy had once believed that helping the dog would give him purpose, but now it was clear. They had healed together, sharing a journey that was full of love and quiet understanding. The seasons had changed since the boy first brought the dog home. Now, autumn had arrived, the air crisp and cool, and the leaves on the trees had turned golden and red. The boy and the dog spent their evenings outside, enjoying the quiet beauty of the world around them. The dog had come to love these walks, its pace steady and confident, exploring the world without fear. The boy noticed how the dog had grown, not just in strength but in spirit. The dog no longer looked over its shoulder, waiting for something bad to happen. It looked forward, eager to discover what each new day would bring. The boy realized that the dog's journey was not just about overcoming the past, but about embracing the future. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to do the same. As the boy sat on the porch one evening, watching the dog run through the yard, he realized how far they had come. The dog was no longer just a survivor. It was a happy, healthy animal, living its life with a joy that was hard to imagine just a few months ago. The boy's gaze followed the dog as it ran in circles, its tail high, its body full of energy. There was no hesitation now, no fear. It had embraced its new life fully. The boy smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The dog had been through so much, and yet here it was, free and joyful. The boy had done more than just save the dog. He had helped the dog find its way to happiness. The dog, in turn, had given the boy a new sense of purpose and a reminder of the simple joys in life. They were both home, in every sense of the word. As the months passed, the boy and the dog continued to grow together. Their bond deepened with each passing day, each shared experience. The dog was no longer a broken animal, but a cherished companion, a part of the boy's life in a way he never could have imagined. The boy often thought back to their first meeting, when the dog had been fearful, hesitant, and alone. Now the dog had become a constant source of joy, its presence a reminder of the resilience that lay in both of them. The boy knew that life wouldn't always be perfect, but as long as they had each other, he was ready to face them. Together, they had created a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, laughter, and the quiet understanding that they were never truly alone anymore. And as the dog lay beside him, the boy whispered softly, "We've made it."